now that we've covered the training aspect and breaking that down, both the strength power work, the resistance training, and then the cardiovascular, there's, like I say, like the third aspect of your off-bike development, and that would be your flexibility and mobility work. Well, that I also break down into sort of categories of flexibility and mobility work. And most people know the traditional flexibility type of work you can do, which is obviously stretching. And a lot of that is the traditional sort of static stretches where you hold a stretch for a certain period of time that helps increase flexibility. And that does work, but there's also other ways to approach that with what we call dynamic work or movement, where you're moving through as great a range of motion as you possibly can. And we kind of do that in a few different ways. So whether it's movements, just body weight movements that you might see, if you look across social media, you see all these people doing this mobility work. And we also use a stick or a bar where you're rotating and moving, and it gives you an opportunity to sort of gauge your range of motion and movement. So, and I'm also a believer in yoga. So it covers everything from your static stretching to your dynamic stretches where you're moving, as well as your yoga work. And I guess I would say, why would you want to do this? Obviously, some people get that it will increase your ability to move or your range of motion, and that's 100% correct. The other would be to injury prevention, that if you have that greater range of motion, you're able to not sprain and strain or be on your limiter as much, which means without getting too deep, if you're bent into something, for a lot of you are, let's say hip hinging, where you're over in front of the bike, and if your hamstrings are quite tight, it's going to start pulling on your lower back. And some of you might experience this. And as a cyclist, you're like, oh man, I think about how many people in the cycling world come to me about their back problems. And a lot of that can be stemming from just the back is overworking because your hips don't rotate enough and your hip flexors are too tight. So that can aid your physical output or your performance alone, besides limiting the no need for that stress while you're out riding or that fatigue. And I guess the other part it would allow you to really explore. You can be coached by somebody and they're telling you to get back further on the bike or over the bike further, but maybe you're limited by your mobility, and no matter how much somebody's trying to help you with that skill building or that technique, you're just not able to do it. Recently, Aaron Gwynn did a special on braking where he talks about dropping your heels and stuff. And I find people who just don't have any, we call that dorsiflexion. So that takes time to develop. And so there's not one reason that you would do this stretching. And also a little myth. So many people come to me about stretching and say, I'm really, really sore. I don't stretch enough. Stretching doesn't necessarily aid recovery. And being sore and fatigue can be a lot of elements. That's just naturally going to happen when you train hard. So hopefully that kind of isolates the flexibility and mobility work a bit better for you to understand. And again, in future series, we're going to cover, and I want to get in deeper with this mobility, providing you guys some mobility, both the dynamic and the moving sort of mobility work, as well as the static stretching that you can do, and some yoga advice. So hopefully that all works for everybody. Otherwise, once again, check in with us at PerformXTraining.com and reach us through those channels, and as well as at our Instagram at PerformX Training, and we'll see if we can point you in the right direction.